your far left is an older technology, and that particular piece is the Model 1857 light 12-pounder gun. It's a bronze cannon. It's smooth bore. It fires a spherical projectile. It is the older technology. In the middle, that piece is a 10-pounder Parrott rifle. Notice I said rifle. There's a big difference in technology and advance in technology. This particular weapon system has spiral grooves cut inside the barrel that can put a spin on a projectile. And finally, on the far right, we have the 3-inch ordnance rifle. That too is a rifled weapon. A good way to think of the differences between these two different and separately distinct weapon systems, because the technology for the far right two guns is essentially the same, is to think about the difference between the way a basketball goes through the air and the way a football goes through the air. The 12-pounder Napoleon, that bronze gun, is like the basketball going through the air, or as I like to describe it, a pea through a straw, a spherical projectile which goes essentially in an arc or straight line with no spin on it. However, the 10-pounder Parrott and the 3-inch ordnance rifle on the right have a projectile that looks a lot more like what we think a projectile should look like, and we are going to talk in more in depth about ammunition here in a minute. But the big difference between these two is that these black guns, or rifled guns, put a spin on not a spherical, but a projectile-shaped projectile that makes it go further and faster and straighter. So think about the difference between these two cannon systems as the way a basketball flies through the air and the way a football goes through the air, and you'll basically understand the difference between what these cannons can do. In terms of their capability, if you look to your front and you look at that barn that sits up there on Cemetery Ridge, that 12-pounder Napoleon firing its round spherical projectile can consistently hit that barn. Wow. But these two rifles on the right, once their range is adjusted, can consistently hit the barn door. So why do we have these two systems? Well, let's talk about ammunition. We'll see if we can give you an appreciation for that. The first piece of ammunition that Jeff's going to hold up here is for the 12-pounder Napoleon. You see a fixed piece of ammunition. You've got everything there pretty much to fire one shot. Now, the business end of this projectile is that 12-pound iron ball. That's a solid sphere of iron mounted on the front end of that. That's what the 12-pounder Napoleon, as it's colloquially known, fires. A round iron ball. It is attached to a wooden block, and strapped to that wooden block is a woolen cloth sack that contains, depending on what type of projectile you're firing out of the Napoleon, 2 or 2.5 pounds of cannon-grade powder. That's fixed ammunition. I've got everything there. I only have to ram that cannon one time in order to set it off. Now, perhaps by now you've figured out from this talk so far how some of these guns get their names. When I tell you that that Napoleon is called a 12-pounder, that's not because that's all that that cannon weighs. In fact, that piece of equipment, as you see it sitting there, weighs a little over a ton. But it fires a 12-pound iron ball, and that's what gives it its name. One might wonder, against those massed infantry attacks, what good is a solid iron ball? And the fact of the matter is, these two different types of weapons, smoothbore and rifle, can be used to engage different kinds of targets in different ways. Now, if I wanted to try with a 12-pounder to engage another battery to disable the enemy's artillery capability, I might want to use solid shot. Or, and this is a much more dramatic way of thinking about it, if I fired a 12-pound Napoleon against an advancing infantry formation, obviously that solid ball is only going to kill probably one man and a man directly behind him. But if that formation was moving laterally in my front and I was looking down one of its flanks, I could fire that solid 12-pound iron ball and it would skip down through that long formation lengthwise like a bowling ball does in a bowling alley, and could injure or kill a significant number of men. One of the important things to remember about Civil War artillery is that the units that make up the armies north and south are generally locally raised. That's why so many of these units have state designations. So chances are, within your company, you may be standing next to cousins, neighbors, fathers, or sons. If you see somebody you've known all your life turn to jam by one of these things,